I'm super excited. We are going to finish Michael Morpurgo's My Friend Walter. I've just got 2 more parts because it won't fit in 15 minutes. Right, are you ready? Sitting comfortably. Father broke the news beautifully, in such a matter-of-fact voice. He went into the hallway of the house and called them. He said he was sorry he'd been gone longer than expected, but that Humph had found the golden orb from the crown jewels in a hedgerow. And that was not all. He said there could be a small reward too, just £250,000. There was a moment of hollow silence, and then they all cried like babies. Some people are very strange. "See, I told you," said Gran, wiping the tears off her cheeks. "I told you there's a light at the end of every tunnel." "Yes, Gran," said Mother, "and age before beauty, and waste not, want not, and a stitch in time saves 9, and where there's a will, there's a way." And they all pointed at Will and laughed till they cried again. Within half an hour, we were besieged in the house by reporters and television cameras. They photographed us for hours outside the front door, under the bright lights they'd set up, and we all had to cuddle Humph. He couldn't understand it, all this sudden affection. Mother and Auntie Ellie had groomed him till he glistened so that he looked really quite presentable for his press conference. They tried to make him bark into the microphone, but he wouldn't, and they asked us the same questions again and again. How old we were, where did we go to school, what was it like to find the crown jewels, what was it like to be famous, and then the most common question of all, what will you do with all the reward money, Mr. Throckmorton? "Perhaps we'll buy ourselves a farm," said Father. "We'd like a place of our own, wouldn't we?" And that made the headlines in most of the papers the next day. "Gold-sniffing sheepdog finds crown jewel in hedgerow." "Oh, we'll be able to buy a farm of our own now," says Farmer Throckmorton. It was 10 days before it all died down, and we were left on our own again. There were 10 days of endless visits to television and radio studios in London and in Plymouth, where everyone smiled at us and gave us sweets, and Humph got brushed at least 3 times a day. Gran and Auntie Ellie had their hair done every single day. Mother hated it all and said it was like being in a zoo, and if she had to answer any more questions, she would scream. At school too, we were celebrities. In assembly one morning, the headmaster called us both up to the platform and asked Will to tell everyone about it. I don't know why he didn't ask me. Will exaggerated. Well, he would, wouldn't he? Especially the bit about how he'd seen the sack first and helped Humph to drag it out of the hedgerow. Anyway, they all cheered when he'd finished, and I was surprised at how many new friends I suddenly had. Of course, my teacher launched us all into drawing pictures of the orb and Humph, and she picked out mine as being the best and the most brilliant, which it was, and pinned it up in the front of the hall school, where only the best pictures go. Well, it should have been the best, shouldn't it? After all, I had been closer to it than anyone else at school, except Will, and he couldn't paint to save his life. In all that time we never saw my friend Walter. Time and again we coughed for him, Will and I. We went out into the garden, we went into every room in the house. We went around the block with Humph 5 or 6 times a day, and we coughed for him and we called him. He was nowhere, or if he was somewhere, he wasn't letting us know. We knew how much we owed him. He'd been right all along. Everything had turned out just as he'd said it would, and it hadn't even given us a chance to say thank you. Besides, there were a few things I still couldn't quite understand. Surely he wouldn't go off like that without saying goodbye, but as the days passed it certainly looked like it. And something happened that gave us reason to believe that my friend Walter was still very much with us, and that he was still weaving his web, if you know what I mean. I never saw him myself, and neither did Will, but Mother did, though of course she didn't know it. He's a cunning old spider, my friend Walter. Chapter 11. Ever since Father told the world he wanted to buy a farm, the postbox at Auntie Ellie's had been full of letters from estate agents and farmers offering this farm or that for sale. Father didn't like the look of any of them. He wanted a farm not too far away, a couple of 100 acres or more, and good buildings. He hadn't liked anything he'd seen so far, and he was becoming quite dispirited. Anyway, as Gran kept reminding us, we mustn't go putting the cart before the horse or start counting our chicks before they were hatched. After all, we hadn't yet had the reward money. Then one Saturday morning, Mother came back from the shops, pushing little Jim and running up the front path. Going like a train she was. Now, that was very unusual, because Mother would never run if she could possibly avoid it. And anyway, she'd often told us never to run while we were pushing little Jim in his pram. It was too dangerous, she said. She was all excited and couldn't get her coat off before she told us. "I think I may have found the perfect place, dear," she said to Father, who was still opening a pile of posts in the kitchen. She sat down at the table and pushed the letters aside and went on. "You've got to listen. He said it's only just come on the market. Thatched house, couple of 100 good acres, just like you wanted." Wait a minute, said Father. "How did you find out about it? Who told you?" This old man I met. He was sitting on a bench outside the church feeding the birds, and he said he recognised me from my picture in the newspapers. Strange-looking old man he was, kind of old-fashioned in a long black coat and a stick, but most polite. Anyway, he said he knew a farm a few miles away which was up for sale. Good land, he said. "Walter Raleigh!" said Will. Mother looked at him somewhat bewildered. Father assured her that it was just a new-fangled expletive. Instead of cripes, he said. Mother seemed satisfied with that and went on. "Well, this old man, he told me he was born and brought up there. Best farm in the world, he said. Said we should go and take a look at it right away, soon as we could, before someone else snaps it up. He was such a sweet old man, dear. He said how we were such fine-looking family, and he talked all about you two children." He turned to Will and me. "You know, it was almost as if he knew you. The way he spoke about you. What uncanny it was. He said he'd like to think of you growing up on the same farm he'd grown up on. And then your children could stay there, and then their children, and then their children. He'd like that, he said. And then he just upped and went off. He had a terrible limp. Oh, poor old man." "Did you get a name?" asked Father. "He never said his name," said Mother. "I never asked." "Not him. The farm, dear. What's the farm called?" Oh, I've got that somewhere. I wrote it down. He made me write it down." And she fished in her shopping basket and pulled out an envelope. "I put it on the bottom of my shopping list. Where is it? Oh, here it is. It's called, let me see. I can't read my own writing these days. It's called Hayes Barton, near East Budleigh, not far from the sea," he said. I knew it. I didn't have to search the back of my brain. The moment Mother said the old man had been born there, I knew the rest. So that was his plan. That had been his plan all along, to buy back his own birthplace, to keep it in the family. I thought it all out in the car on the way to Hayes Barton that afternoon. I thought back to the great family gathering around Auntie Ellie had taken me into the hotel by the tower, how no one knew who had invited everyone. It was him, my friend Walter. It must have been. And hadn't he said again and again how he would have his revenge, how he would take back what was rightly his? Hadn't he promised me he would put his family back where they belonged? But why me, I wondered. And there were lots of other relations at that party. Why had he chosen me? I knew before we ever saw Hayes Barton that Father and Mother would love the place on sight. And they did. I knew there would be room enough for Will and me, for little Jim and Gran, and for Auntie Ellie when she came to stay. And there was. The fields and the hills around were lush and green. Even after a dry October, it was a fine farm. The best farm in the world, just like he told Mother. The owners weren't there. They'd already left, it seemed. But we were shown around by a neighbouring farmer who said the house needed a lot of doing to it. It looked wonderful to me, though I did see a lot of spiders in the bedrooms. and one whopper in the bath that scurried down the plug hole when Humph jumped up to look. But spiders apart, it was, as Mother said, perfect. We walked the farm from end to end, and Father seemed to like what he saw better and better with every stop. We were getting back into the car when the farmer led Father away by the elbow to speak to him confidentially. He didn't take him far enough, because I could hear every word he said, and so could Will. But then, of course, we were listening rather hard. "Course, I don't want to put you off, Mr. Throckmorton, but there's been talk, you know." "Talk? Well," said the farmer, whose flat tweed hat was so thick with age and sweat and dirt that it sat stiff as a board on his head. "I don't like to say this, it doesn't seem fair to them that's just left, but I've got to be fair to you. You're a farmer like myself, after all. I've got no axe to grind, have I?" His voice dropped even lower, and he looked over his shoulder before he spoke again. "Well, you may not believe this, but it was the ghost that drove them off. They told me as much themselves." "The ghost?" "It's true, honest it is. It drove the tractors off. It left gates open. It started up the milking parlour in the middle of the night." Father laughed. "You can laugh, but they saw it." "Saw it?" said Father. The farmer nodded. "Headless, they said. It walked headless up and down the passage every night, moaning and groaning like goodness knows what. They couldn't sleep, not a wink. Every night it was, and it was him, they said." "Him?" "That Walter Raleigh. He was born here, you see. Lived here, he said, and in the end they chopped off his head. They said he'd come back to haunt the place." Father roared with laughter and clapped the farmer on the shoulder. "I've heard some stories in my time," he said, "but that takes the biscuit." I'm going to read the last 8 pages.